Does that mean that your vision of the future of this country is kind of a constant conflict?
Well, I don't have a vision for the future of this country. It's not my place to have one. I think that Gaza has been an insoluble problem and the international community has given it to Israel to solve.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see why Egypt shouldn't help solve the problem of Gaza. They share a border with it. Egypt used to own the Gaza. Give it to Israel, to give it to Egypt to solve.
Mm.
And if you were to say that, people would say, well, we don't want the Palestinians. That's what Sisi and co. We don't want them. Palestinians brought terror everywhere they went. Everywhere they went. Where the PLO went, where Yasser Arafat went. Everywhere they went, they brought terror.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it was Egypt, Jordan, Tunisia, Lebanon. That's why. So the Jewish state keeps on being told, solve this insoluble problem. Is there a final status solution? Not at the moment, there isn't. And as the center-left president of this country, President Herzog, said to me the other week when I interviewed him, he said, at the very least, it's not the time to talk about it. You know, it would be like asking America immediately after 9/11 to cede territory to a terror group.
But it is the time to talk about how to defeat Hamas.
Yes.
And Israel have made it clear that their objectives, of course, are to take back the hostages, but also to annihilate Hamas. Aside from the militant Hamas terrorists, as much as Hamas is an idea, an ideology, I've heard you say it can be defeated, like Nazism was defeated, like Imperial Japan was defeated.
Like communism was defeated.
But was communism defeated?
Well, largely.
It's still pretty alive. And Marxism is certainly a very popular ideology.
It is, but think back to when we were growing up, how much stronger it was. I mean, the Eastern Bloc, much of Europe was under communist control when we were growing up. The Soviet Union was, a major power in the world. But go back a couple of decades before that, and it was rolling out across the world, the communist ideology. It's not gone, but it's certainly not got the strength it had. In the same way that Nazism hasn't completely disappeared, it's pretty rare, but you get the odd little group of weirdos.
China is communist. Well, there are Marxists in our country, in America. It's compared to Nazism, it's a completely different story.
Yes, that's true. I mean, well, that's because, of course, as everyone knows, everyone who knows anything about history, the rightful moral taint that not just Nazism but fascism had after the Second World War meant nobody wanted to be near anyone advocating that again. Because of all sorts of interesting historical reasons, there are always some people trying to bring back the communist ideal. Sure. Nevertheless, I mean, it's an idea it's taken a heck of a beating. I mean, there are still ignoramuses around who think, it never worked anywhere, but let's try it again. It never provided for the societies, but it will next time. Okay, you can always find some really slow learners and wicked people who do that. But I would argue that the idea has been very considerably defeated. And even in China, you can't call it exactly communism anymore. They call it communism, but it's open to debate at least. Hamas is, yes, an ideology. It's very similar to all other jihadist ideologies. It's very similar to ISIS. It's very similar to Al-Qaeda. It's very similar to all forms of millenarian Islamism. But Hamas itself is a structure, it's a group, it's a party, it's an entity. You can destroy that. You can kill the leadership of that. And that's what the Israelis are currently doing.
You can kill the leadership, but it's an ideology it's a group that's got now more support, according to some polls, in the West Bank. Not the case in Gaza.
Yes.
But it's almost like the more victorious or the more that Israel do destroy them in Gaza, the more popular, it's like it reinforces the ideology.
Yeah, there's a problem with this, and we heard it after 9/11 as well, which was some people said you can't defeat terrorism without creating terrorists, which is a logical circle. Because that means all that happens after you're attacked is you just sit back and say, okay, I won't do anything in case I create terrorists. which I don't think is the best policy. What you say about the West Bank, Palestinian opinions about Hamas there is true, but it's been true all the way through. The reason why Mahmoud Abbas is currently, 16 years into his 4-year term, is because they can't have elections in the West Bank, not because the Israelis won't let them, but because the Palestinian Authority can't have them, because otherwise the Palestinians in the West Bank will elect Hamas. Mm-hmm. Of course, the people who hate Israel in the West Bank will be likely to celebrate any, perceived victory against the Zionists, as they would call them. Well, yeah, but what's Israel's answer to that? Just not attack Hamas? I don't think that's possible. I think that. But I think the question underneath your question is the really tricky one, which I don't have an answer for, because the answer that was there was trodden all over from 2005, which is, a very interesting distinction between that exists that is worth reflecting on is that, there's a difference between psychopaths and sociopaths. Psychopaths are probably born. Sociopaths are made. Gaza is an entity filled with sociopaths. I say that with confidence because 18 years, which is the time that Hamas has ruled Gaza, is of course precisely the length of time of a young man or woman's education. Hamas has had control of the education of Palestinians in Gaza for 18 years, and it has created a generation of sociopaths.
Well, it's worse than that. Even UNRWA have also.
Yeah. Wow. That is such a striking analogy that Douglas just made. That what is the difference between psychopaths and sociopaths, and how that relates to what's happening with the Hamas. And the interviewer there basically saying, you once said that we can defeat Islamism and jihadism the same way that we've defeated communism and Marxism. And the moderator pushed back a little bit with Douglas, right? He said, well, have we really defeated communism? Have we really defeated Marxism? Socialism? I mean, you see that coming up with all of the young children coming up, right? Wearing the Che t-shirts and the Xi Jinping t-shirts and, Marxism, we need Marxism, we need socialism, that we need to try socialism and communism. It was tried before, but it was never done the correct way, as Douglas pointed out. That's the thing you get from all these socialists, Marxists, and communists, right? Hey, yeah, they might have killed hundreds of millions in the past, but that was a wrong way of doing it. We're not going to do that now. Just give a chance to have something happen. Now, I basically say that the communism in China, it's in name communism, and it is. I mean, they certainly don't have the same type of rights and freedoms and things that we do here, but they're certainly moving to a more capitalist. You can't say that the communist Chinese are utilizing communist themes to drive their business model. Their business model is pure capitalism. Now, what they do to the workers and to the businesses and how they control those businesses and, who gets the majority of the share of the profits and those kind of things, that can be, that can be done according to policy that they have. But I wouldn't say that's just pure greed. But you've got millionaires and billionaires and people that are making a ton of money. Not only the average person who started a business and then grew that business into factories and then grew that business into larger conglomerates and whatever in the capitalist system within the Chinese communist structure. I'd say it's sort of, quasi type of economy, that's there. But as far as defeating, now the only difference is that ideologies, that's more in terms of, an economic, political ideology. Now, you could say that you're trying to defeat an ideology which is a religious ideology. And as he said, for 18 years, they've had the minds and the souls of these Palestinians growing up. And what do you think for 18 years they've been fed a steady diet of? That Israel over across the border, they're evil. They're the Zionists. They took over the land. They did this to your grandparents and your great-grandparents and your parents. They took our land. They did this. If you've got that from kindergarten into elementary school, into middle school, junior high, high school, and in college for 18 years, your minds have been there. Of course, you're going to turn many of those people, as Douglas says, into sociopaths with the fervor and with the zealotry, that comes with indoctrination and prejudice and all kinds of things. So although I don't think you can blame the people coming up out of that, because that's been their educational diet, that's been the food they've been fed. The political, evil, the political, the political diatribe from an evil source, an evil entity, and saying that we're the correct ones, they're the ones in the wrong. That's what's happening over there. So that's what we have on tap for you today, folks. You're watching the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. I'm your host, Dr. Nasir, where I give you my political prescription from my political perspective. What happens when you have Douglas Murray in an interview talking about what are we going to do with Hamas? Is there a way to get rid of the Islamism theocratic ideology when it relates to culture and religion and indoctrination and all those things come clashing together? Let's get back to more of the interview right now.
Giving the kids in Gaza.
It's UNRWA, it's UN entities that you and I and other Western taxpayers have all paid for, who have not policed the school textbooks in Gaza, did not stop them teaching the children not how to thrive in a potential Singapore, but rather how to kill Jews, and that the best thing you could do with your life was to kill a Jew. So that
true.
was them.
Indoctrination,
all the UN aid agencies,
mind control.
UNICEF was meant to look after children, didn't even bother to try to get hold of the kidnapped Israeli children or even get updates on them. They didn't. It took months for UNICEF to even come to this country. And the one thing that UN aid agency is meant to do is to protect the well-being of children. And they didn't. They did nothing. And that's our tax dollars at work again. Every international aid agency and others failed. Why is it when you're in Gaza, every second house has weaponry in it? Every school has weaponry in it. Every mosque has weaponry in it. Every hospital. I mean, they say the Shifa hospital. It wasn't a hospital. It was a command headquarters of Hamas where they tortured people and held prisoners. All of this was done under the watch of the United Nations, under the watch of the international community. How can anybody in Israel trust the international agencies or the international community not to allow that to happen again? Because they allowed it to happen. I'll give you another example, if I may, very quickly. We need to get on to the north probably at some point, but I've spent a certain amount of time, as well as in Gaza, in the territories in the north of Israel and the Lebanon border, where there's quite a lot of activity at the moment. Both sides are shelling each other, incursions into Israel, from Hamas as well as Hezbollah. I was there the other day. I saw the footage of, because you might say, the 2006 war ended with an agreement that the international community would police the southern part, the south of the Litani River, the border of Israel and Lebanon, would police it to make sure it didn't become a sort of another weapons buildup that meant we'd have another war in the Lebanon. 18 years on, or whatever, 17 years on, Hezbollah has amassed about 160,000 long-range missiles in Lebanon, in the area that the international community was meant to make sure didn't get militarized. And when I was up there the other day, I saw recent footage of Hezbollah firing rockets into where I was, and the UN cars driving along the so-called demilitarized zone as the rockets were going off. And what did they do? They just U-turned and went back. Tell me this is the United Nations doing something. Like, tell me that Israel should trust the international community
They're impotent, United
safeguard
Useless
the people of
Nations.
this country. It's a joke, and a really expensive joke, because we're all paying for it.
Absolutely.
We've been paying for it for decades. People in the West have to realize we have been rinsed by these people and misled by them. So if somebody says, well, what are you going to do to ensure that the next generations of Palestinians are not made into sociopaths in Gaza? I'd say, make sure every nation in the world who says they care, make sure they're not. Make sure they're actually educating their children. Make sure that they're actually making sure that aid gets to the people. But do you see any willingness to do that? I haven't seen it to date, so why should anyone expect it from now?
And then if you're talking about the international community, look at what happened in The Hague at the International Court of Justice, only the 11th of January, where South Africa took the case of genocide against.
It's just useless nations. What a bunch of stupid, idiotic, moronic retards. I mean, first of all, Douglas is so right. We house the United Nations in the United States of America in New York. I don't even think we charge those guys rent. It's free. So much of our tax dollars gets diverted to the useless nations. It's not the United Nations, it's the freaking useless nations. So much of our money, they bilk, they fleece the United States of America. They fleece all the other any country that has money. And where does that money go to? Oh, some goes to developing nations, a tiny bit. Most of it goes to the people that are in power in those nations. How much money do you think is going to China, to Russia, to these other so-called first-rate nations? They're getting a huge amount as well, cuddling up to the useless nations. And all this money that's supposed to be spent on, as Douglas was basically saying there, that to protect the children, to look after the children, UNICEF and all these other things, it's just a way for them to basically get more and amass more and more power, write edicts, write position papers, write policy, have them passed by a majority, and they have no teeth to it whatsoever. You have a lot of people in the government of the United States of America, on both sides, but a majority on the left, the Democratic side, that love the fact that the United Nations is there because they want to build a more globalistic, universal type of planet rather than the individual nations. The United Nations, the useless nations, don't look at it as if there's individual nations that are there. But if they had their choice, if they had their chance, the people who are truly running and truly in power of the useless nations, they would want it to be absolutely globalist in nature. That the United Nations would be, the useless nations would be the entity structure that would be in charge of the whole world. And that whoever was in charge of the useless nation, whoever rose to the presidency, to the top position of the useless nation, they would be the supreme leader of the world. And that everything that happens around the world would have to be siphoned and go through the useless nations. And the edicts and the laws and the policies and the rights of individuals and societies and all would be coming from the useless nations. Oh boy, would that be watching these movies, that we see out there. Of what's happening, the futuristic movies of one entity taking over everything. But that's what the useless nations and the people that want the useless nation to become that bit of power. Sort of what's happening with the European Union. All the power and all the structure is in Brussels. Another entity is controlling your lives, your rules, your regulations, your people, your customs, your cultures, everything. And you have to bow down to that, kneel to that authority. When did everybody think that was going to be a great idea? No wonder so many people in Britain are wanting to get out of that and and other people in the EU as well and say claim their own sovereignty for themselves. That's what needs to be done. Anyways, folks, we appreciate you taking the time to watch. You've been watching the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. I've been your host. My name is Dr. Nasir. If you haven't done so already, we'd love for you to subscribe to the channel, like, share, and follow. So let us know what you think in the comments below. Check out the video links here and there. I'll leave with my final thought, which is, when you're right, you're right, and when you're left, you're wrong. Until next time, folks, take care and stay safe.